Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Pan Future Podcast. Today is Saturday, October 28th, 2017. I am your host, Sean. As always, I still am. I have been informed by official decree from the powers that be that I am still Sean. And this week, no rants and ravings up top, no little bits of news. I just have a really great interview with Astronaut Abby, so let's get right to it. One brief note about the sound quality. It's a little iffy for some of it because Skype just doesn't like me, or the internet gods don't like where I live or something like that, so it's a little bit iffy, but I think you will be able to understand everything, and you will like the interview anyway. That's not optional. You have to like it. I mean, if you've listened to this much of my introduction and haven't given up already, why not just keep going? Oh, hey, I just thought of something. I could actually use this bumper for this interview. It sort of fits. And now,
it came from outer space.
All right, everyone. I have for the interview this week joining me Astronaut Abby. Abby, welcome to the show.
Hi, Sean. Thanks for having me on today.
All right, thanks for being here. So, I guess in a nutshell, tell me what you do.
So, I am a 20-year-old college student right now pursuing a double major in astrobiology and Russian, and I plan to be the first astronaut to walk on Mars. So right now I'm trying to prepare myself to reach that goal, but I also founded and run a nonprofit called the Mars Generation, which focuses on exciting and inspiring young people especially, but really all people around the world, about the importance of space exploration and STEM education. So that's science, technology, engineering, and math.
Yeah. Well, I think that's great. That's very ambitious also. Where do you get this amount of motivation at your age?
Well, I've always been an overachiever, so I've always been the kind of person who likes to, take on more than they can chew and then deal with the repercussions of that later. So that translated into college, where I decided that I was going to do everything, and part of that everything was starting this nonprofit. So fortunately, I actually have a lot of support and a lot of other people who are involved in the nonprofit that make it possible. If it was just me running this, there'd be absolutely no way that would happen as an undergrad, but really it's the whole team. Yeah, that's great. So you also appeared in a documentary called The Mars Generation. How was that experience, both as being part of the documentary, but also going to space camp? I think when I was young, there was a movie about space camp, and then it kind of went away, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily know that space camp is a thing that you can still do. Right. So I went to space camp for the first time when I was, I want to say 12, maybe 13 years old, and it's kind of an interesting story because I had actually wanted to go a couple years previously. I'd wanted to be an astronaut ever since I was a little kid, and I was super excited about space, and I'd found this interesting looking camp online, and I'd brought it to my mom, who was a single mom raising 2 kids, all of that, and she looked at it and saw that it was $1,000 for 1 week and was pretty much like, oh, yeah, no, probably not going to happen. And then a couple of years later, someone actually reached out to my mom, someone who knew how excited I was about space, and told her about a program called Reach for the Stars, which is in Minneapolis, the city that I grew up in. It fundraises and helps students every year here go to space camp on scholarship. And so I joined that and was able to go my first year. And then after that, I went a couple more times, including the time when the movie was filmed. And it's just an absolutely phenomenal experience to get to spend your every
waking and sleeping moment, feeling like you're not in space, but like you're in the space industry. And to know that you have all of these people around you, peers and teachers and mentors and everyone who are equally passionate and excited about space travel as you are is really, it's a mind-blowing experience.
Yeah.
So having had that, we then now as an adult, God, it's always scary to say that, as a pseudo-adult.
Don't worry, it gets better.
We now offer Space Camp scholarships, 10 every year, to students living at or below the national poverty line.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So it's kind of a full circle thing to have been able to, be the one helping out what was then 12-year-old Abby. Now 20-year-old Abby gets to help out other students to hopefully have that same experience.
Yeah, that's great. And I had to go look at the Space Camp website because I also didn't know that they have an enormous variety of programs for younger students and high school students, and even adults and families can go do this. And I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's super cool. My favorite program that they have, so like you said, they have all kinds of programs, adult programs, corporate programs, family, day camp, all of that. But my favorite one is Teacher Space Camp. Which is where teachers get to go, and they specifically focus on, experiencing space camp, but even more so focus on how can they bring that back to their communities and how can they translate the things that they learned and experienced at space camp into their classrooms. Which I think is the most powerful program that they run. Yeah,
that's fascinating. So you mentioned STEM education and support for that. I've also read that I think you also support the STEAM idea. As a musician and an artist myself, that's where my training is. That's of interest to me. And how do you think that the arts play a role in the STEM world?
Oh, I think that arts absolutely play a role. They're inseparable from STEM, and they really should be included in there with STEM subjects, because arts are what allow us to be creative and to think outside the box and to look for solutions that we otherwise wouldn't have. And they're also what reminds us that we are human, which in every aspect of STEM that you look at, it's important that you also have the arts in order to complement that and to keep you balanced with that. So I'm a big supporter of including the arts as a fundamental subject on with STEM.
Yeah. I like that idea. My only issue with it sometimes, I know it's not directly related to STEM, but there's a lot of emphasis on standardized testing. And you can't really test art the way you test other subjects. So I guess if there are teachers out there who catch this interview, I hope their school district support the arts without requiring some sort of strange standardized test for painting or whatever it may be.
I don't even know how you would do that.
Yeah.
especially with arts, I mean, in every subject you have this where students can range widely in their ability and their method and whatnot of how they go about doing something. Standardized tests don't capture science accurately or math or any of those because there is so much creativity that goes into all of those things. But especially with arts, how do you compare one student who's a painter against another student who's a dancer or a musician? Or I mean, there's no standard metric of how you can judge that.
Right.
And so, we need to just remember that every student is unique and contributes in a different, special way.
Yeah. And, that's something when I've talked to some other people about space exploration and some people who are working on generation ships and long-term space colonies and that sort of thing, they talk about preserving civilization, too. So it's more than just doing the science work to make the machines work or whatever. It's really the whole range of human experience that you want.
Sorry about that.
Oh, that's all right. I have several of those too. They don't like being shut out of my studio while I'm working, so they're knocking on the door now.
For listeners, my cat just decided to make a guest appearance, or you know how that works. Or as soon as you bring out a computer, the cat has to be right on top of the keyboard. And But yes, I'm sorry. You were mentioning before things like generation shifts and how it's about preserving humanity as a whole, and I think that's a really important point to think about, especially in all forms of STEM, but especially in space exploration, because you can look at space exploration as having a couple of main reasons, in essence, why we aspire to this, why we put the resources into this, why we do space exploration. And one of them is to further our technological capabilities, because space exploration it creates this crazy boom here on Earth of different ways to do things. The other one is the natural curiosity of going out there and exploring. And another one that you have to be a little bit more careful talking about, because it's pretty far out in the future, is how do we preserve humanity? How do we make sure that in the long run, humanity is a multi-planetary species, and that if something were to happen to Earth, which we should look at not as an if, but as a when type of subject, when something happens to Earth, whether it be overpopulation, whether it be a traumatic solar event, whether it be really anything that you can imagine, how do we continue humanity? And the answer to that is space exploration. And in order for humanity to really continue, we need to not just have technology or engineered structures or anything like that, or even just people. We need to have all of the things that make us human. So we need to have our culture and our history and our religion, and all of those types of things have to go along as well.
So that kind of thinking is one of the main reasons I do this podcast, that long-term view, wondering, thinking about humanity 100 years from now, or 500 years, or 10,000 years from now. How does someone your age get into that? That's, for some people, it's very heavy lifting to think about the eventual end of the Earth, and then to still be hopeful about our prospects.
Right. And it's true, it is really heavy lifting to start thinking about that. And I think that that's one of the reasons that as a society and a culture, we don't necessarily think as far in the future as we should, is because it's daunting and it's scary sometimes to do that. And it means that you have to put aside what seems best for right now for what will be best for the next generation, or what will be best for 10 generations down the road. And that's hard to do. For me personally, the reason that I'm able, I guess, to look at the future and think about it and really look at why space exploration is important to that, and dedicate my life to this, is because I grew up as a huge science fiction nerd. and so the idea of space exploration and the role that it will play in our future was never something that was unusual or novel to me, because I grew up with all of those thoughts churning around in my brain and being fed by fiction that I was reading. That when you're 8 or 9 years old, it's hard to distinguish between what's fiction and what's truth. And so it puts you in a, I guess, more open place to think about that.
So did you have a favorite science fiction author or show that really stuck with you?
That's such a hard question, because there are so many good science fiction series out there. I think that as far as shows go, one of my favorites that I actually encountered later on in life was Babylon 5. I was really a fan of that one. That was a good time.
Yeah,
and
that show for me is actually like the very first thing that got me thinking about, the 1,000-year kind of timeline.
Yeah.
Even though, even way back mumble years ago when it was first on TV, and I was probably about your age when it came on.
So it wasn't Star Trek for you, because that's what I always hear from people, is that Star Trek is what got them thinking about space or about the future or whatnot. Very rarely do I hear Babylon 5.
Yeah, I watched Star Trek. I love Star Trek. I watched it when I was a kid. I watched the original series in reruns, and Next Generation was great. But for some reason, I didn't bridge that gap between fiction and reality. Maybe because there were certain philosophical topics that Babylon 5 covered that Star Trek handled in a different way. In particular, and I mean, in the very first season of Babylon 5, I mean, like, the moment for me is Sinclair is being interviewed for a TV show, and the interviewer asks, is it worth being out here in space? And his answer is basically, if we aren't, everything in human history is not worthwhile. It gets lost. You don't want to lose all of that, because eventually the Earth will be uninhabitable.
Right, which when you look at it on a solar system type timescale, is inevitable and is realistic. When we look at it on a human timescale, it's more difficult to think about that reasonably, but it's absolutely true.
Yeah. Any favorite authors?
Favorite authors? Off the top of my head, one that's just really springing up, and this kind of bridges the gap between fiction or fantasy and science fiction, was Anne McCaffrey with the Dragon Riders of Pern. I loved the futuristic novel element of that, where they traveled to a different world, and then once they got there, they ended up in a less technologically advanced society for a long time, and then had to regain that technological advancement. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, that's some of those books were among the earliest I read. I think I was interested in more the fantasy, and dragons and stuff was cool. And then it's like, oh, this is actually science fiction too. And
right, it hits all of the good points there for anyone.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's circle back to your work now with the Mars generation. You mentioned the scholarships for some space camp things. If someone were to go to the Mars Generation website and want to participate, what would they be able to do?
That's a great question. So you can find us at themarsgeneration.org or at as the Mars Generation on pretty much any social media channel. And your participation method really depends on you as an individual. So students can participate, everyone can participate by becoming a member. And becoming a member has a lot of really cool things involved with it. There are special member perks like interesting Skype calls with people in the industry, and you get a cool Mars Generation patch, a t-shirt, and all of those kinds of things. And you get email updates about the work that we're doing. So I definitely encourage everyone to go sign up for a membership there. But you can also be involved as in other ways. So if you're a student, you can join our space or our Student Space Ambassador Leadership Program, which is a way. It's a two-pronged program. One side of it is that we're trying to empower students to go after careers and goals in the STEM and STEAM industries, and then also give them the resources necessary for them to actually attempt to do that. Because it's one thing to say, students should be doing this, and it's another to actually support them in that method. So we're trying to support them to reach those goals. The other side of it is that we want our students to really give back to their communities as well, because a big part of what we are based on as an organization is this idea of dreaming big, acting big, and then inspiring others. So you have to constantly be using the work that you do to reach down and help someone else up as well. And so we encourage our students to be ambassadors and leaders in their own communities for space exploration and STEM education in whatever way fits them, and really want to help guide that. So that's a great way for students to get involved. We have a lot of resources for teachers and for parents who have young children or children of any age who are excited or interested in STEM, or who they want to be excited and interested in STEM. And then, of course, you can also always join us as a donor. to help us do the important work that we're doing and to make the future that we want to see a reality. And the final way that you can join us is as a community member. So to join us on our social media channels, to read our website, to read our blog, to go and interact there and be a part of this bigger outreach of space exploration.
Yeah. It sounds like a great resource for people who want to do something and don't know what to do, or maybe, to overcome the feeling that I'm just one person. That's something you run into with a lot of issues, whether it's, fighting some social ill like hunger or homelessness or something. Having an organization like that is a great resource because it sounds like there's something, at least something for anyone to do, no matter at what level you want to or are able to participate.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that as an organization, as we've grown over the last 2 years, we've really striven for is inclusivity and understanding that everyone is at a different place in their lives and everyone has unique things that they can offer to our community, and helping to create those channels so that all of those unique talents can be appreciated. And so we definitely want to invite everyone to come participate in whatever way that they can. And then also to challenge them a little bit to maybe go outside of their box and participate in ways that push what they knew they could do.
Yeah. And speaking of community, you've also done some global traveling too. So you're getting response from all over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spoken at conferences and events in a couple places around the world so far. So most recently I was in Istanbul, Turkey, and in the past I've spoken in Canada and in the UAE and in all kinds of other places. And that's been in-person things where I've gone and I've represented the Mars generation and interacted with students and also leaders from around the world to try and really get a handle on how we as a global society can become spacefaring and how we can continue to push human space exploration. But the Mars generation also does a lot of international work without ever leaving the States. And that's because we're I feel like I'm bragging now, but we're a really innovative group in the sense that the whole nonprofit, in essence, was originally built off of new media, off of digital social media and online. And so that makes it so that we can reach out to students and teachers and families and communities around the world on a daily basis, and try and really connect all of these people. So we've done video chats with classrooms in every corner of the world. We have members who come from, all over the place, and we're really proud to be doing that, especially as things around the world seem divisive. And it's important that we remember that we're all one humanity, that we only have one Earth that we're living on, and we're all in it together. So the Mars generation wants to serve that entire global community.
Yeah, well, I am. This makes me very hopeful that the push to space could be the thing that finally unites us as as a single species. And I think you're doing really fantastic work.
Thank you. And I think that's a really important topic, because I would hope the same thing, is that as we continue to push farther out into our solar system and our universe, it'll help us like you said, unite or think about ourselves as less divided and more whole, and really start to bridge those gaps. So I'm a big proponent of international collaboration as far as space travel goes, both from a overlying aspect of the hope for the future and also a practical sense of how are we going to get this done? Where are we going to find the resources? Where are we going to find the money and the willpower and all of those things? And it's going to have to come. I honestly believe that it's going to have to come from all over the world. It's going to have to be different countries all working together in order to accomplish bigger and bigger goals in space exploration. So hopefully we'll see.
Mm-hmm. Your one of your biggest desires is to be the first astronaut on Mars. Have you talked to Elon Musk yet?
I haven't to Elon Musk yet. Our schedules haven't quite matched up. But I'm a big fan of private space industry, and that's a question that I get asked a lot, especially the past couple of years, more and more frequently, is what's your opinion on companies like SpaceX or Blue Origin or any of those that are privatizing space? And I look at it as being an essential part of space exploration. Oh, my cat was just crying. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
She agrees that it's an essential part of space exploration.
She's just telling you, if you go to Mars, don't forget to bring the cat,
Right. I mean, what would I do without my cat? But it's vitally important that we have these private industries who are starting to take part in space exploration, because if you look at it from a perspective of, let's say, NASA, the government industry in the U.S., which is responsible for space exploration, NASA can really only focus on one major goal in human space exploration at a time. And right now, and for the past 30 or so years, that goal has been low Earth orbit. That's been the International Space Station, that's been the shuttle program, those types of things. And those have been incredibly important. And they have helped us learn so much, both about space exploration and about our world here at home on Earth. But if we want to do something more than that, if we want to return to the moon, if we want to go to Mars, if we want to go farther, we're going to have to hand off the baton of low Earth orbit exploration to someone else. And private industry is stepping up to be the perfect group to take over that exploration of near Earth, so that as a industry, NASA can focus more fully on goals that are farther out, I suppose.
And I think the private industry thing is interesting too, because they also have the potential to be have a more long-term vision. I just spoke last week. I just posted the interview this morning with an aerospace engineer friend of mine who's currently working for JPL. And we got into a discussion about how with every new presidential administration, the NASA mission kind of gets kicked around like a prize and focused over here and then focused over here. And we're going to the moon and we're going to Mars and now we're going back to the moon again. And I can't help but think that sometimes that is detrimental to NASA's, at least human spaceflight missions, because they do take such a long time to plan and execute, that with private industry involved, SpaceX can have a single-minded vision to work on something for 30 years and not be disrupted from doing that.
Yeah, which is definitely a really important factor to consider, and it's, you get trade-offs with each of them. So private industry versus public has benefits and detractors, and same the other way. But that's one of the major benefits of private industry space exploration is that ability to focus long-term and to make decisions that outlast a 4-year cycle, and those types of things. And it can be seen as something that's being combated in some way recently by NASA with their most recent program, which is the Space Launch System, or SLS as it's called, which is a vehicle that's being produced right now that will have just an insane launch capacity. It'll be the most powerful rocket that's ever been produced. And the idea behind that is that it's extremely versatile. So it's the kind of rocket that if we, in 4 years from now, or with the next cycle of elections, we end up having an administration that wants to go back to the moon, this this rocket and the system will be able to accomplish that, versus if we have an administration that says, yeah, let's go to Mars, this rocket can still do that. It can do everything from low Earth orbit to Mars and possibly beyond. And so that's one of those things where you build in flexibility into these mission parameters that allow them to shift a little bit, and can help to kind of combat that, but it's still not the same as what you see in private industry, which is, I mean, you put it perfectly. It's one of the strong positives of that.
Some of the groups that are working on various projects or ideas for getting to Mars and living there make it pretty clear that they want to go to Mars and not come back. If the opportunity for you to go to Mars and be the first astronaut there is contingent upon saying, and I'm never coming back, have you given that any thought?
I have, actually. I've given that a lot of thought. So my perspective on that is that I would not agree to a mission that is not intended with the best of intentions to be a two-way mission. And I have a couple of reasons for that. One of them is that as much as I love Mars, I do really love Earth as well. So that's an important one. But there are actually reasons that are more important than that. And a primary one is that right now, as of today, and as of what I foresee for the next 10 or 15 years, we do not have the capability technologically to sustain human life on Mars for a reasonable period of time. So we can't send people there and expect, if it's one way, that it will be anything more than a suicide mission. That would simply be lying to ourselves if we said that we could. And I disagree with the concept of suicide missions in space travel for a couple of reasons. One of them that's a huge reason that really doesn't get thought about often enough, I think, is that there is no quicker way to lose public support and public interest for space exploration than by killing astronauts in space. That is the single most impactful thing that you can do that will tell people that, and especially if it's purposeful, that space is not somewhere that we should be and not something that they'll support. So I think that would have an extremely detrimental impact on our ability to have publicly supported space exploration in the future. I also think the other major importance of bringing people back from Mars, especially on these first couple trips, is because they can share firsthand their experiences having walked on another planet with people here on Earth. And that's really the reason that we're sending people to Mars, is to get them back. That's a part of what makes us different, of what makes human exploration different from robotic exploration, is that we can then bring those people back and they can tell us firsthand. They can transmit not just what they experienced to scientists and to engineers and mathematicians and physicists and all of those people, but also to the public, and to become in essence figures that we can look up to and role models for the next generation to look at and say that there really is nothing, there is no limit, the sky is not the limit, because we have seen people walk on Mars and those people are here. So they have this really incredible capacity to make an impact by coming back to Earth. And so I fully support two missions.
That's an interesting thought that I guess I hadn't really considered before, but if you think back to the Apollo missions, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon was great, but if he had never come back, it would certainly have not had the effect that it did on our public consciousness. And for those astronauts to come back and become leaders or ambassadors for the space program, or leaders in the community, or even as some of the Apollo astronauts did, become elected officials, I think could also be an enormous benefit to our planet.
Absolutely, and that's exactly. I mean, the moon missions are a great parallel for future Mars missions, in that you can look at the strong impact that those astronauts had back on Earth and see firsthand how important it is that we bring our astronauts back.
So now let's take a complete left turn, and I will offer you a question that I've answered myself on the show, and I've asked a few other guests about this. In the event of a disaster of some sort, or just that we decide to leave Earth permanently, and there's several 100 million years of evolution can take place without us, which animal species gets your vote for next sentient beings on Earth?
Ooh, this is so much fun. So I've done a lot of interviews, and I've spoken in a lot of conferences and in hundreds of classrooms around the world. And man, every time that I get a question like this that I've never heard before, oh man, it excites me so much. So congratulations, first off, on having an awesome question. And as far as the answer goes, I'm gonna go for dolphins.
Yeah.
Dolphins are pretty freaking badass.
Yeah.
And I think that given a couple millennia there, they could definitely carve out a good spot in the hierarchy of animals.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're not the only person who's picked dolphins or whales.
They're just so smart. They're so highly intelligent.
They're incredibly smart, and their ancestor species were land-based as well, so they do have some advantages that way. When I talked to my aerospace engineer friend last week, he picked whales and dolphins, and but we did discuss the difficulty of developing a civilization underwater. So they might have to come back out on land again, because, our civilization is based on using energy, and burning fossil fuels or building nuclear reactors underwater is very difficult to do.
Burning anything underwater is really difficult to do.
My personal choice is the octopus.
Ooh, those are underwater creature.
They are, and I know they're also an invertebrate, so that's a big strike against them, but they're intelligent, and I give them the edge because they have the dexterous ability to manipulate their environment. I think that might be the biggest strike against the dolphin, is it's just got a snout to push things around with. So it'll have to grow out of that. But the octopus already has the tentacles to manipulate the world with, so I was going with octopus, but I could see dolphins too.
Yeah, that's one of the things that is definitely, like you said, a strike against dolphins, is that the dexterity is an issue, the ability to manipulate environment is an issue. As far as basing it on how we've built our civilization on land versus how it could happen underwater, I honestly don't know how it could happen underwater, but I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't say that either the octopus or the dolphin or the whale would have to become land-based creatures in order to I guess, take over the position that humans have, because we're just one pathway of how energy can be used on Earth, and we're one pathway of how that evolved and happened. But given different circumstances, there's a possibility that ways of energy exchange that we don't even understand could be employed underwater, and it could be a whole different circumstance from what we see today. And especially since so much more of the Earth is covered in water than in land, that's something that I wouldn't rule out, is the idea of a futuristic underwater advanced society.
Well, there you go.
This is the most fun I've had for a while in an interview.
Good. Since you're a relatively new college student, what is your educational path advice for anyone who would like to be an astronaut or work in the aerospace industry?
That's a wonderful question, and I have some advice that I feel like it always sounds a little bit cliche when I say it, but it's honestly so important and has guided me along my educational path for the last 7 or 8 years now. And I received this advice when I was 13 years old from an astronaut, actually, Luca Parmitano. He told me to do what I love, not what I thought NASA wanted me to do, because what NASA is looking for in astronauts is people who are passionate and excited about what they're doing. And so that's really what I try to pass along to students, is this idea that you can't force yourself to be anything that you're not. So if you are not, if you're not naturally, or if you don't enjoy physics, then you probably shouldn't go into physics. If you don't enjoy producing art, then you probably shouldn't go into art. So you really need to tailor your educational career to what you are capable and interested and excited about, and then also see how that fits in with your goals and your dreams. An example of that is that when I was younger, when I was in high school, I thought that I wanted to be an astrophysicist or an aerospace engineer, and that I was going to go to a military academy and all of those types of things, because that's the path that you take to become an astronaut.
Yeah, when I was a kid, that's what I thought too. It was like you had to join the Air Force. That was the way you did it.
And it used to be a lot more like that, because especially during the early ages of space travel, it was mostly test pilots and physicists and engineers who were really becoming astronauts. But nowadays, it's a lot different from that. And I ended up changing my educational goals from that. I ended up going to a small liberal arts college. I go to Wellesley College in Massachusetts. And rather than studying astrophysics, I now study astrobiology and Russian. And so those are drastically different from what I could have imagined in high school pursuing. But the thing is that they're a different pathway towards becoming an astronaut, and they are no less valid than entering the military or than becoming a physicist or anything like that, because they're equally important to the space exploration that we're doing now and that we'll hopefully be doing in the future. So it's a question of, when you're looking at your path in any industry, but especially in an industry that's moving as quickly and as much as space exploration does, is not necessarily thinking about where it is now, but thinking about where it will be at the time that you enter that industry. What will be important then? And so I looked at it and I said, languages will be very important. So I studied Mandarin and Russian and English, and biology is going to be of the utmost importance, because that's a huge reason why we do space exploration, is to look at what's out there, and also how does what's out there in space affect the biology that we are, the biology of humans. So I switched from something that I vaguely liked, which was astrophysics, to something that I absolutely love, which is astrobiology.
That is, I saw a talk by someone who studied astrobiology a few weeks ago, and it was just fascinating. And part of the thing that blew my mind was that astrobiology can even be a thing now. That our scientific knowledge has advanced to the point where we're not just wondering if there might be other planets out there, but we're actually looking for markers for life and early chemistry, chemical markers that could indicate life, or thinking about going to Europa and looking in the oceans. And I think that's just incredible, even in my own lifetime, how much the expanse of space exploration has opened up.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's mind-blowing. I think that it's the kind of thing that you would read about in a science fiction book and wouldn't necessarily imagine we'd be doing today. But the 21st century is a crazy, wonderful time to live in, that we are doing that, and that we are living out that futuristic element. I worked at a space life sciences lab down at Kennedy Space Center in Florida over the summer, and I honestly, every day when I would walk into work, I would have that same thought process that you just described, where I would have a moment where I'd have to pause and just be like, is this real? I can't believe that we have the capacity right now to be studying potential life in other parts of our solar system. Like that's wild.
Yeah, that is incredible. Well, I don't have any other questions for you. Is there something you would like to close with, or are there any events for the Mars generation coming up that you want to share?
Yeah, so for closing, I would just once again really like to invite everyone out there to join us at the Mars Generation and become a part of our community, become a part of this really exciting upswell in space exploration. You can find us at themarsgeneration.org or as the Mars Generation on a lot of different social media channels. I encourage you to go do that. As far as specific events go, in about, 6 weeks, I will be running a marathon for the Mars Generation. And actually, we have a whole group of people who will be running the half marathon as part of our team. And we'll all be fundraising to try and raise some money for those Space Camp scholarships by doing this running. So I would invite you to, it's a little late to start training for that, but you can definitely be part of our crew by going ahead and checking that out and cheering on all these wonderful folks and hopefully donating to our campaigns as well.
Yeah.
That's
so you
the
didn't,
Space Marathon.
You didn't have enough things to do, so you decided to run a marathon too?
Right, because junior year of college wasn't stressful enough that I threw that one in. Yeah, I agreed to that and then realized what it meant once I started training. But no, it's been a good time. It's been something on my bucket list, so I'm doing it, and it's for a really good cause, so that's exciting. That'll be November 26th down in Florida on the Space Coast, so okay. I encourage everyone to get involved with that.
All right. Well, that is great. Thank you so much again for joining me on the show today. I really appreciate it, and talking to you makes me hopeful for the future. I appreciate that too.
That makes me glad to hear, Sean. It was really such a pleasure getting to talk to you, and I hope that everyone who's listening has hopefully learned something today, but even more so has been excited about what this future will look like and takes away that same kind of excitement and hopeful feeling. So thank you so much for having me on.
Yeah.
And that's your show for the week. Thank you so much for joining me and tuning in and listening to the interview. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you are excited about space exploration. If you aren't, go back and listen again. Practice makes perfect. Also, thank you so much for Astronaut Abby and the Mars Generation for helping put this interview together and get the schedules synchronized and all that. And if you want to learn more, be sure to go to the Mars Generation website and find them on Twitter and all that. I will put all those links in the show notes. And if you want to find the show notes, go to panfuture.org. That's panfuture.org. I think. I'm not sure I can spell correctly early in the morning. But at any rate, check out the show notes, go to the links, and do all the things with the stuff on the internet. And I will talk to you again in the future.